calories is a man-made idea that doesn't actually accurately represent how food affects the body. What they're not understanding is that that percentage that they're showing, so that, what is it, 12% of the total, which is 2,000, you're already well above your number. Hello everyone, welcome to Mind-Blowing Health and Wellness with Violet, Pat Chat Edition. I'm Violet.
And I'm Pat.
We bring you these videos because Patrick finds interesting topics, information online, or even reading through our comments. And what do we have? What are we talking about today, Patrick?
This week we're talking about, I think, basic but very important stuff. So we're going to review how to read and understand like a nutrition label on food. Okay, first let's go through like the overview of a nutrition label, how to read all the information, like the main sections. Okay. So and maybe add like our grain of salt, like on each, if they're important, less important, and what to be careful about. So first, the first information, the first section we have on the nutrition label is like the serving information, the serving size. You'll see, for example, it's like you'll see a serving size, which could be a cup, could be 2 pieces, 4 pieces. It could be like depend like a certain amount.
I know that for the Canadian food labels, they've decided to make that standard. So I know one of the things they were talking about is that a container of yogurt, and so since most yogurt containers are a certain size, like whenever you're going to look now at even if you buy the big tub of yogurt, they're going to give you for that little, like a one serving is going to be 1 serving, so that it's all the same across the board. And they're trying to do this with a bunch of different things. So I will say that's one thing I do like about what the Canadian nutrition guides have said they're going to do. I don't know if we have those new guides yet on everything. Probably not. It's supposed to be coming this year, I believe.
Okay. I did find, like, it's a good point. I did find very little differences between the Canadian and American labels. So everything we're going to say, like, here applies to both. The only difference, obviously, will be like the metric system versus the imperial system. So serving size, very important, not because, like, all the nutrient information are based on that size, and we know that usually they're like tiny little serving size. So it's important if something has, for example, 10 grams of carbs, and it's like a third of a cup, measure it, because a third of a cup is not a big serving.
I will also say, just going back to my pre-keto years, I do remember looking at nutrition facts and not really clicking in that there was a serving size. And especially when you buy something that seems like 1 serving. So for example, when you buy the single serving size of chips, you expect it to be a single serving, but there's actually more than 1 serving in there. Same thing if you buy, like, let's say you're in a gas station and you buy like 1 cookie, like one of those big cookies, like when you turn it over and you read that information, it's usually for like a quarter of the cookie. So I do feel like that was one thing that came up that was pretty funny / not funny, because people are basing what they're eating, what they're choosing to buy in a gas station, basically quickly turning it over and looking at that. And like, how many people recognize that there was like 3 servings in that? Like, no. And first of all, even if you recognize it, who's going to actually eat that in 3 different settings?
Yeah,
probably not.
Another good example I have are like breakfast cereal. Like, you know, you take your bowl and you fill it and you add your milk. There's usually at least 3 or 4 servings probably in a bowl of cereal, because the usual serving is like 2/3 of a cup, I think.
That's as an adult. If you think back to when we were teenagers, like you're probably eating like 7 or 8 servings in all fairness.
So for those who are starting keto, this serving size, I think, is important. Yeah, and you need to weigh your food, you need to measure your food, just to get an idea about like the nutrients you're getting, in what you're eating. Second section, calories.
Yeah.
So calorie in the US and Canada is the same calorie. So for us, we're going to say calorie are not that important, but you have something to add about like calories?
Okay, so obviously from our perspective, doing a ketogenic lifestyle, the calorie count is only important in the sense that it helps you to see, like, helps you to make your eyes go to where's the energy coming from, right? So if I take up something and it's, you know, high in calorie and most of it's coming from carb, not interested. If I take up something that's high in calorie and most of it's coming from fat, I'm pretty happy. So I don't think that the calorie count is going to deter you as much as the rest of the information on the label should deter you, because the energy isn't the problem. It's where the energy is coming from that's actually the problem.
Then third section, we're gonna have like the macronutrients. These like is the essence of the nutrition labels. You have your fat, you have your carbs, and you have your proteins.
Mm-hmm.
Usually fats are divided into subcategories. I don't know
Yep.
if you're gonna go through them. Do you know them?
So a little quiz for me. So trans fats are fats where they've taken a fat that's not saturated and added hydrogens to it to saturate it, so that it becomes a but it's not a. So they can't really call it a saturated fat though, because they've chemically done this, or chemically, mechanically, I'm not really sure, but they've done it in a process. So they're called trans fats. Very unhealthy. Then you have your unsaturated and your saturated fats, and so polyunsaturated or unsaturated, like basically just means that you don't have all the hydrogen bonds in the fat that are occupied. So you can have just one not occupied, or you can have more than one not occupied. And of course, saturated fats, all of the hydrogens and oxygen bonds are made. Obviously, saturated fats are healthy, as are some unsaturated fats. So for example, olive oil is an unsaturated fat. It's healthy. The fat that you find on your meat is a saturated fat. It's healthy. Right? So one is not better than the other as long as it's naturally occurring. It's when it's not naturally occurring that it becomes problematic.
We all will often see in the nutrients like a line for cholesterol. Should we pay attention to that?
Our body makes, I don't remember how many thousands milligrams of cholesterol. Like I think it's 7,000. So basically, if you don't eat it, your body will make it. And if you eat it, your body will make a little bit less. And we don't typically eat as much as our body needs and will make. So this idea, like I know they're talking about eggs, for example, like the amount that of cholesterol that you get from eggs compared to what your body's already making. It's an interesting repercussion of people believing that cholesterol was causing heart attacks back in the day. But that has more to do with the fact that cholesterol was found at the site of heart problems, because cholesterol is part of the process our body uses to heal, right? Because it's one of the lipids that can be used to hold things together.
Sodium, same thing. Sodium, you have a line for sodium. So the carbs, like that's the main point of interest. Carbs is a family, like it's subdivided in categories. Usually you'll have the dietary fibers, you'll have the total sugars, and sometimes too the sugar alcohols. I just before you comment, just want to point out, like, here is the main difference between Canadian and American labels, and I do prefer the way American do their stuff, in a way that they actually have a separate line for the added sugar. So, for example, you'll have like a total carb of X grams, you'll have your dietary fibers, you have sugar, and a sub-line of sugar with the included added sugar. We don't have that in Canada. They still keep it like together.
Hopefully that's a yet scenario.
Yeah, hopefully too. So first, fibers.
Okay, so first of all, I just want to say the grand category of carbohydrate is all the different kinds of sugar that you can have. So usually when they're talking about simple sugars, it's, the oses connected together, and in a way that when you taste them, they still taste sweet, versus fiber and starches don't tend to taste as sweet. So, and to me, those are the big differences in our body when they are able to be broken down. So that's the other difference between fiber and the other two: starch and sugar. So the sugar in the subcategory sugar. I get confused with saying that because it's the same thing. It drives me nuts. But starch and sugar can be broken down in the body and used the same way. So it's not, like it's one for one. Like the difference is fiber. Sometimes we're not able to break it down. So, like this is part of the reason we don't eat tree bark, because we can't break it down. But so there's some fibers we can break down, the soluble fibers, and so there's some that we can break down, there's some that we can't. And what I find interesting is that when we're looking on this label, now that we know that they do the subcategory of sugar that's added, it'd be interesting for them to also do soluble fiber versus non-soluble fiber, because they usually tell us to subtract the fiber, but some of the fibers we can actually digest.
You have a good point. This that I saw on I think on a package of popcorn, they did soluble and insoluble.
Oh,
So
nice.
they did separate it. I didn't find like in my examples like a case, but like now you talk about it. I already saw it.
See, so
Uh,
this is a company being transparent, and I think I love that, because the truth is that soluble fiber that they typically would tell you to subtract, you shouldn't subtract it because your body's actually going to use it.
Okay. So what I want to add to that, like the starch, you were talking about starch. Starch is not something we see on the label. So we kind of assume that you take your total carbs, you subtract your fiber, you subtract your sugar, you subtract your sugar alcohols, and the remaining number of grams are probably starch. We're not sure 100%, but like what I saw here is that the only two ingredients that they are not required to put on the label is water, obviously, and ashes. So I was not sure about ashes at all, but like I saw
Ashes?
water and ashes.
They are not required to tell
So
us that they're burning stuff and putting it in our food. Like, that's what I feel like I'm being told.
I don't know.
Because
I was-
ashes, that's when you burn something. They are not. That is so scary. I'm so happy I don't eat processed foods anymore.
Okay,
That is scary.
yeah. One last thing about carbs. With the fiber, it brings the concept of total versus net. Do you want to just do like a little?
Total carb is all of the carbohydrates in the food. So basically, it's not making any distinction between fiber. Like, it's just counting them all. Which, by the way, is the way that Dr. Westman teaches people to do keto, because he says that sometimes that fiber is digested by people. And it also, if you're trying to live a healthy life, the unfortunate reality, and this is where walking into that minefield, unfortunately, companies want you to buy their product. And the healthier they make the label look, the bigger chance that you're going to keep eating it, even if it's fully not a healthy product. So I do think that sometimes companies, well, not even I think, I know there was a company that was using normal chocolate chips and saying that they were keto-friendly chocolate chips, and it really was just regular chocolate chips. So companies do that. They want your money, and sometimes they're willing to lie to get it. Absolutely read your labels, and at the same time, be wary of your labels.
Next big piece of information on labels are the percentage daily values.
Okay.
Personally, I honestly never really checked them. I think they're all based on a 2,000 calorie per day diet. So percentage, I don't know. What do you think about that?
So what I do find interesting about them showing the percentages on the label is for all those people who are doing calories, then they're going to be paying a lot of attention to these percentages, because they're going to be trying to have the food that's coming out with the least percentage of daily calories. What's dangerous about that? Every gram of fat is 9 versus every gram of carbs is 4, which is going to push people to think that if I want to be able to eat a little more and lose weight still, I should go towards
The carbs.
the carbs. However, what they're not considering, because calories is a man-made idea that doesn't actually accurately represent how food affects the body, what they're not understanding is that percentage that they're showing, so that, what is it, 12% of the total, which is 2,000, you're already well above your number. 20 grams of carbs is what's putting you in a bad situation. You're already at 34, and they're saying it's 12%. So this is that thing that's very scary, right? If I don't really understand how food affects me, and I always hesitate when I call sugar food, but if I don't understand how sugar reacts in my body and causes me to feel bad and causes me to gain weight and causes me to have health problems, and I'm only looking at it from that perspective of, well, I got 2,000 calories to spend, and I can spend 300 grams worth of calories on out of that to get my 200. That's 1,200 calories
Okay.
that I'm spending on sugar in a day, right? And that's 300 grams. And we need to be careful with that idea, because that's harming me much more than doing 100 grams or 150 grams of fat.
Okay, so those percentage are based like on what like the food guides recommends, like towards like a more carb heavy diet, we know like the important number is 20 grams of carbs. Like if for example we still stick to the 2000 calories per day number, how would you like recalculate then how many grams of fat am I allowed per day? Like, are we sticking to a rule of 80% fat, 10%? I don't even remember, like 80%, 70% fat, like 20%.
You're talking about for keto?
For that, for
Okay.
let's say for LT, like.
Okay, so this is again, this problem of percentages comes back to this idea that man-made numbers, calories, and our decisions about where the calories should come from is more important than what my body is telling me is healthy. What we've figured out is that the average person, if they eat 20 grams of carbs or less, and it's or less because you actually don't need to eat the full 20 grams, your body can use some of that energy right away and put some of it away in your glycogen stores, and probably will have to not store any, if at all, or store minimally. Versus if you go above 20, now your body's pushed into that position where it's storing that sugar away as fat. That's not healthy. So even with this, like this idea that we should eat 80% fat or 70% fat, or trying to like nail that down to a number, no. Actually, what you should be doing is eating healthy foods that give you good quality protein. And if you are going to eat veg, good quality veg that's not going to put you over 20 grams a day. And then that combination of foods, stop when you're satiated. If you do that, there could be days where you're eating 80% fat because you ate only meat. Or there could be days where you're doing like 70, 25, 5. Like it 70, 25, 5. Yeah, it depends on what you're eating. And I feel like it's rather than focusing on trying to get a specific percentage, you should be more paying attention to how do I actually feel when I allow myself to eat vegetation. Because that's the more important piece of the puzzle, right? Like I figured out that I don't do well on nightshades. How? Because I took most of them out, and then as I was bringing things in, I realized, oh wow, every time I eat tomatoes, or every time I eat potatoes, or anytime I eat these kind of things, I feel horrible, right? And that was my big clue. Violet, you shouldn't be eating those things. So I feel like sometimes we're so focused on what we think we're allowed to do that we're not paying attention to what our body is telling us we should be doing. And I'm trying to encourage everybody to pay attention to what your body is telling you to do, rather than, oh, but that doctor over there said I'm allowed to eat. Like when you're feeling bad, or when you're not able to play with your kids, or when you're, when you have joint issues, that doctor's not the one living your life. You are.
So my question is, like, those keto calculators we did use like in the beginning, because like one of the first goal of keto for a lot of people is to lose weight. They want to have an idea of what they should allow to each macronutrients. From what you just said, like keep your carbs under 20, eat to satiation, and you should be fine. You should use the weight you have to lose.
So what I will say for that is that I remember the keto calculators that we did, and I remember what I did with the information. Of course, I knew 20 grams of carbs or less, but then what's the maximum fat that I could eat? What's the maximum protein that I could eat? And so it's more, if you're going to use the calculator, it's more about understand maximums than understanding goals. It's not the same. The same way that there's 20 grams of carbs or less. Well, yeah, it was 100, I can't remember what the number was, 170 grams of fat or less, and my protein was like 100 or less, I think, or 120. I can't remember right now because I don't care about those numbers anymore. But the thing was, at the beginning, it's kind of one of those situations where you're trying to play with things on your plate, and like understanding what I'm aiming at, understanding what my maximums are helps me to figure out, okay, how much do I put on my plate? And then from there I can figure out, well, did I really need all that on my plate? Mm-hmm. Right? Because how many times, and you were witness to this, how many times did I make plates and then I couldn't even finish it, right? Like it took a while to start to figure out like how much I could actually eat once I wasn't chasing carbs anymore. right? So at the beginning, was I finishing my plate? Of course. And that was the other part of the story is I say this all the time. When you first start keto, you're going to eat the exact same amount of energy just from different sources initially. And then you're going to have a huge drop in what you're eating because once your body gets fat adapted, it doesn't need you to finish all the fat on the plate because it has fat to eat. And then eventually you get back to a place where you're eating a bit more again because, well, okay, now it's not going to keep taking from this source to the point where I don't have any reserve. That would be crazy. It's going to leave a little reserve, right? And so it's going to push you again to eat a bit more. And that's precisely what happens to people who stick with. But guess what happens if you allow carbs back into your life? All of that stops happening, right? And this is something else that we see often. You need to understand this information. So like I needed to understand how much protein was my max. I needed to understand how much fat was my max because for knowledge sake, not necessarily as a goal. And that's another thing that we see often is people look at fat as a goal or protein as a goal. It's not a goal. You eat till you're satiated. Some days I eat more and some days I eat less. And I can never tell like when this is going to happen. Well, first of all, I mean, I only eat one meal a day, but it's like when I get to the end of my day and I'm about to make that meal, how many times was I planning something bigger and thought to myself, I'm just not that hungry. I'm going to have eggs because I know I'm going to make it and I'm not going to eat it. Or I can't really say that happens. I don't pass on a whim, but like, yeah, that I make a smaller meal.
Okay. Let's talk about those limits from the FDA because they have all those nutrients with less than or at least. So let's review them like quickly. Saturated fat, less than 20 grams of saturated fat.
I have so nothing to say about this. I mean, everything I before we even go through it, everything that you're going to read out is based on this ridiculous idea that carbohydrates are innocuous and fats are dangerous. And so everything you're about to read is going to be towards that end.
So sodium, what they recommend is less than 2,300 milligrams.
My goodness, I believe that we need like, I want to say 7,000. I'm confused by that number.
That much? Okay.
I can't remember. No, maybe it's 5,000,
okay.
But I know it's more. Okay. I don't think it's 2,300.
Dietary fiber, the 28
I'm going to put it on the
grams.
screen. I'm going to look it up because I can't remember exactly what number it is, but 2,300 sounds low to me.
Okay. Fiber, 28 grams. So that could prove challenging for someone that stick to 20 grams or less.
We don't need 28 grams of fiber.
So yeah.
I mean, this is based on this idea that we need fiber to push food through our system so that we can adequately go to the bathroom.
Yeah.
But as a person who eats hardly any veg right now, I can tell you, if I'm getting 28 grams of fiber a day, I'm impressed with myself, and I'm still going to the bathroom. So what's the other thing that helps us go to the bathroom? I say it all the time. It's fat, right? So I mean, I'm. If you can get it, I don't see it. I mean, I see it being a problem more in the sense that if it's soluble fiber, and your body's actually going to be using some of that, you need to be careful in terms of your carb count, because we do encourage people to do a healthy ketogenic lifestyle, and so 28 grams of fiber is going to put you, especially the soluble part, is going to put you over.
Interesting here, like the added sugars, they recommend less than 50 grams, which is like, remember, like the part with the sugar is the added sugar. So, yeah, less than 50 grams, which is like a bit high. Okay, so vitamin D, 20 micrograms at least. Calcium, 1,300 milligrams.
I'm sorry, vitamin D, only 20?
Milligrams, micrograms.
I'm just wondering how many IUs that is, because I know like you're supposed to have 10,000 IUs. Okay. So I'm wondering how does that translate? Because we're working at an American site. So, but like that 10,000 IUs seems like it would be much more.
Then calcium, 1,300 milligrams.
Okay.
At least. Iron, at least 18 milligrams. And potassium, that's good. Like potassium, we knew that one, like 4,700 milligrams of potassium daily. And this one is a hard one to get. You need to eat a lot of salad to get to your 4,700.
Now of course we're not opposed to supplementing if you know you're not hitting your numbers in terms of like especially calcium, potassium. magnesium. Those three, like, we're not opposed to supplementing. It's just a matter of choosing a quality source and getting the one. And even vitamin D, I think most people should be supplementing because we don't get enough time in the sun to produce all of what we need. So we do need to ingest it. And vitamin D3 specifically, because that's what humans are able to use. So I would definitely suggest that for some of these things, a supplement is not a bad idea if you don't think you're getting enough.
So like Lay's chips, you'll have 20.
Why Lay's chips?
Yeah, because like, yeah, American,
Okay.
like American and Canadian eats a lot of chips.
Okay.
But like you would think, oh, it's good potato.
We'll start with the
oil.
unhealthy foods.
So,
Okay.
yeah, so yeah, an unhealthy food.
Okay, so
28 grams a serving size. 15 chips, Lay's like tiny, 15. That's not a big serving
I'm
size.
curious. How much is in the full bag?
They don't say.
Okay.
I don't.
I
have
wonder.
that.
I feel like just one of those examples where you buy a single serving bag, but you can't eat the whole thing. I'm pretty sure a bag of chips is like 50 grams.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
they're saying 28 grams.
So total fat, 10 grams. Saturated 1.5. Trans fat 0. They use vegetable oil, so sunflower, corn, and or canola oil. Cholesterol 0 milligrams. Sodium 170 milligrams. Potassium 350. Coming from the potatoes, I know potatoes are a good source of potassium. Total carbs 15. Dietary fiber 1. So your net carbs are 14 for that serving.
14? Okay.
14. And sugar is added sugar is less than 1 gram. If we just go through the ingredients: potatoes, vegetable oil, salt. So someone could think it's not a bad food.
Well, if you didn't understand that vegetable oil is really bad for you, yes, you could think that this is not a bad food. But I'll be honest, even if you made that in avocado oil, 14 grams of carbs, it's not the best choice. I mean, but if you're willing to spend your carbohydrates there and you're going to eat the rest of the day pretty more on the protein and fat, then could you fit this in your day? Probably. I really feel like one of the interesting things with all of this is that, and this is classic, right? So this is no flavorings added.
Yeah.
I wonder how it would look if this was ketchup or barbecue or whatever. So I wonder like if it would be all natural ingredients that this looks like, or if it would be a bit more scary.
The only thing maybe I want to add here is that it's a relatively high fat, high carbs food, and this can be like the worst.
You're right. Yeah, because you're right. I didn't even think about that. The fact that you're going to eat. I mean, how long will it take you to eat 20?
Oh no, yeah, no. Of course, like you're probably gonna need you're probably gonna eat 3 servings, like.
Well, okay,
even
so
more.
let's try to be fair. Let's say you only eat the bag, because that's what I think most people would do. They would eat the bag. So now we're talking double that number, so 28 grams of carbs, 20 grams of fat. So you just did high fat, high carb. All of that's getting stored. So that's not the best for your health. And even if you did half of it, which would be 1410, still all that's getting stored, because 14 is still a lot to eat in one sitting. Your body's going to have to shuttle that away. It's just something to think about when you're choosing foods. Eating the carbs are going to affect you.
Keto ice cream. So no bread. I was just curious, like, about one thing on that label was the sugar alcohols. That keto ice cream, 14 grams of fat, 8 coming from saturated, because probably of milk or milk product. Total carbs 8, dietary fiber 2, sugars 2, including 0 added sugar, and sugar alcohols 3. So most site I saw, like, if you want your net carb, you should subtract your fiber, your sugar alcohol. So this would be, for example, here 8 minus 2 minus 3. So you have like three net carbs.
I think the thing that I find scary about subtracting sugar alcohols is not understanding that the only thing that makes a sugar alcohol is there's an OH on it. And so as soon as your body gets that, it cleaves off the O, and it's sugar again. So like I don't feel like that's a good advice to give people. I think sugar alcohol should be counted as sugar, because in the majority of cases your body is treating it like sugar. I don't know if there's any special cases where it's not able to do that. So that's the first thing I'm going to say there. But
they do spike your insulin, so that's why I brought it like this label. Be careful.
So I want to say be careful, because if you're doing a ketogenic lifestyle, if you're not, it doesn't matter. Then that's just a fun choice to take that type of ice cream versus another type of ice cream. But at the end of the day, it's still ice cream, right? If it's still tasting sweet and like you're still pushing you towards chasing sweet.
Hmm. Next one, let's go with our popular brand of soda, and this one is carry like a 500 mils bottle, so 210 calories. Like you would think, like it's not that bad, 210 calories, but total carbs, 58 grams.
Wow.
And total sugars, like subdivided, of course, like it's all sugar. So total sugar 58 grams, include 58 grams added sugar. So
it's all added sugar.
The whole like all this, yeah. The whole carbs is added sugar. Yeah. So be careful.
So now we're talking about high fructose corn syrup.
Yeah.
Which is extremely dangerous to ingest anyways.
Flour. Okay, so a quarter cup of, like, it's a regular, I think, white wheat flour, barely no fat, obviously, like 0.3 grams, like 22 grams of carbs. 22. Zero fiber, one fiber, sorry, and zero sugar. So it's mostly starch. An interesting one I found, like actually that I have in my cupboard, and this is where you need to be careful. On that bag, it's a bag of psyllium husk that we sometimes use like for recipe. So 1 tablespoon, zero fat, zero carbs. I was like, zero carbs. But under that zero carbs, you see 8 grams of fibers. So
and 5 of them are soluble.
And five of them are soluble. So this is a case where like it's impossible to have zero carbs. So I did like some research, and I think there was a mistake on the labeling. Like the other one I found was 10 grams of carbs, 6 grams of fiber. So be careful with those. Sometimes those products can be misleading. It can't be zero. Like you can put psyllium husk all over the place and not getting carbs out of that.
Well, of course not, because fiber, first of all, fiber is a carb, which they didn't label there. But the other part of the story is that the starch, which they're not labeling there. So interesting.
Yeah.
Okay.
So read your labels. You know a bit better, hopefully, how now.
I'm looking forward to the day that the Canadians do that line that says added sugar, because I think that's going to help people to see the difference between what's naturally occurring in the food and then the fact that we do add sugar to a lot of things that, well, I don't know, maybe we need to add the sugar for it to taste the way we want it to taste. But I hope that you guys enjoyed this video, because this was actually quite interesting. Thanks for watching Mind Blowing Health and Wellness with Violet, Pat Chat Edition. If you want to contribute to the production of videos, we have Teespring, we have Amazon links in the description, we have Patreon links, multiple ways to contribute. I love making these videos for you guys. We do. And can't wait to talk to you again next week.
See you next week.